recording. Cool. Well, thank everyone for joining us. Welcome to the D3 informational webinar. We're really excited to be able to tell you all about this really interesting training program, and we're really honored to have Ram and Jen here as panelists and former D3 fellows to tell us about their experience in a couple of slides. First, introduce myself. I'm Jessica. I'm the Innovation Education Coordinator here at MCHRI. And I also have Grant here. Grant, if you'd like to say a couple words.
Sure. I'm Grant Wells, Director of Innovation and Development for the Maternal Child Health Research Institute. And, really happy that we have this really exciting training engagement. Hopefully, a lot of people can participate, and tell your friends if they're not able to make it today. But thanks for joining.
Yeah. So MCHRI, as Grant said, the Maternal Child Health Research Institute is a research institute dedicated to advancing research in maternal and child health by providing financial, educational, and staff support to investigators, researchers, fellows that are doing research in these fields to provide them more opportunities to advance their research. As part of that, we've developed the D3 program, which is a unique training program that is specifically designed to provide fellows with experience in translational medicine, and more importantly, to understand how to apply translational medicine specifically to maternal and child health, which is a very small and very important field that can be burdened with a lot of regulatory and translational challenges. As part of that, the D3 program specifically is a 4-week opportunity for clinical fellows to engage with medical device manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies. These 4 weeks can be broken up into one big 4-week chunk, 2 2-week chunks, or 4 1-week chunks, though we don't recommend that because it is a very immersive experience, and this provides more opportunity to engage more thoroughly. During these actual 4 weeks, fellows are given the opportunity to interact with team members at these industry sites across multiple functional areas to better understand all of the disciplines and all the fields that go into developing a single product or a single innovation. And as well, they get to contribute to one primary field or one primary area in a therapeutic or diagnostic device around whatever they're interested in, or whatever they're interested in exploring for their career journey. With that, we have 2 D3 alumni, Ram and Jen here. I'll have them introduce themselves, and then we can jump into some questions. Ram, why don't you start? You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you're doing now?
Yeah, awesome. So I'm Ram. I'm a 3rd-year pediatric hematology oncology fellow. I did the D3 program during my 1st year of fellowship with Revelation Biosciences, and I'm currently research only, so I'm 100% research in my commitment, but I guess I can talk more about that later.
And Jen, why don't you introduce yourself, your background, and what you're doing now?
Hey, yeah, I'm Jen. I'm a 3rd-year pediatric endocrine fellow. I was part of the D3 program. I worked with Dexcom sort of May 2020. Because I was on maternity leave, it sort of spread out for a longer period, and I just finished up with Dexcom recently.
Great. Jen, you talked a little bit about it already, so why don't you start? But could you tell us a little bit more about your D3 site and what your project was really focused on while you're in the D3 training?
Yeah, so I'm in endocrine and diabetes. So Dexcom is a company that manufactures continuous glucose monitors. So obviously an excellent fit. My mentors at Dexcom were part of the medical affairs group, and I got to work closely with the mentor there. We met weekly, had the opportunity to go to San Diego, where Dexcom headquarters were, visit their manufacturing. Let's see, there was members in the Dexcom who taught me more about the FDA, learned more about unmet medical needs and how technology can fulfill those, and worked on developing a protocol for an investigator-initiated study.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Ram, why don't you tell us a little bit about your D3 site and project?
Yeah, so I think what was really interesting is that doing this in the height of COVID, everything was virtual. So I had no physical interaction with anyone from the company, which made it a very interesting experience. So Revelation Biosciences was a startup company working in the infectious disease profile for a drug potentially to be used with COVID. So because that was a hot topic at the time, and it was a little bit out of my field of expertise, I'd say. But I think it was an excellent experience in that it gave me, kind of this take of what my role could be outside of academia, outside of clinical practice, and how I was viewed as a physician and giving, like answering questions, just like how to develop their clinical trials and things like that. And so admittedly, so the company actually, it was a virtual company, so they didn't have like physical office space. They were just getting that space by the end of my time there, and everyone was in San Diego, so it was interesting to say the least. But I think it was a really cool experience.
Great. Thank you both for your background. If any of the attendees have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll share them verbally with our panelists. Otherwise, actually, Ram, if you could start on this question about logistics, sort of what was it like working fully remote? Were you still able to get value out of meetings if they were virtual? You're still able to engage with various team members? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say, so our first year is 100% clinical. So it was kind of hard to carve out the time to do this, but luckily, because I fast tracked, I was able to push one of those clinical rotations to second year. So that allowed me to take a 4-week block as protected time just for the internship. And, at first it was a little weird to interact with people you've never met online, but you kind of develop these relationships as I had meetings daily. There were daily meetings, and they'd give me tasks to do, like review clinical trial paperwork and things like that. And, I felt as though I could count on, or I could reach out to them even now, 2 years later, and ask for help. And you kind of develop, it's weird, but you develop that same kind of relationship over Zoom, and you get to know people, right? And you spend time not only just talking about work, but talking about life and how things are. And I got to know, their backgrounds and everything. I thought it was a great experience, I think.
That's wonderful. And then Jen, could you tell us a little bit about how it was working hybrid?
Yeah, so most of the meetings we had were over Zoom. I met with my Dexcom mentor every week, and then we set up different meetings with members of the medical affairs group. A few in-person interactions, obviously. I drove down to San Diego and spent some time there in person. Also met with some members of Dexcom when we had the American Diabetes Association annual meeting. So we were all there in New Orleans. And then there is a sort of like a clinical site up at Walnut Creek. So I drove there as well. So it was a hybrid model. Logistically, it was, so I'm doing, it's for endocrine, it's a mix of clinical and research for all 3 years. So I did have to try to schedule the Dexcom meetings and meetups sort of around my clinical schedule, which was a little challenging, but we made it work.
Great. Thank you for sharing that perspective as well. We just had a question come in on the Q&A. How are the fellows paired with companies or industry partners? If a attendee has a preference for a pharmaceutical or biotech over a device company, would that be taken into consideration? Yes, it would. We review all of the applications as part of the application, and we'll go over this in a little more detail later. We ask for your personal statement and what your goals are, and try to align that as best as we can with the various sites that we have. We're very happy to say that we have 10 sites this year, so we have a wide diversity of topics and companies, and we're able to pair each applicant as best as we can with a company or specifically a mentor that would provide the most value to them in their career. We always pair fellows with higher level professionals at these industry sites to be able to give them as many connections and as wide of a reach as we can within their industry site and throughout their internship as possible. In addition to that, we also pair D3 participants with a faculty mentor to provide more sort of insight on sort of the academia and the career track side. So Ram and Jen, if you could tell us a little bit about your faculty mentor and how that relationship worked out for you. Ram, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So my faculty member was Adam, and he's a hospitalist in the PICU or in the NICU. And I think what was really great is to have someone who's like thinking about pharmacology and thinking about that aspect of things, and to kind of bounce ideas off of. And he would give me like readings to do every week and to think about, and we just have a weekly conversation to check in about like, what did I learn this week, and what are my goals for the next week? And it's nice to have that oversight where you don't feel like you're just kind of like hanging out without someone to talk to. And it's nice to have that support.
Great. Jen, how about you? How was your faculty mentor and how that relationship provide additional value?
Yeah, so in the diabetes world, technology is a huge part. So a lot of research here, especially at Stanford, is focused on how we can utilize technology. So my mentor at Stanford was David Moss, and he is a big name in diabetes research and technology. So it was really useful to get his perspective and see like how an academia, what an investigator initiated trial would be like, and then what unmet needs that we could look at, in sort of partnership with Dexcom.
That's great. I actually also had the opportunity to meet David a couple months or so ago, and he really is wonderful. If any of the attendees have other questions, feel free to put them in the question and answer. Otherwise, I'll wrap up with one last question, bouncing a little bit off what Ram said earlier about how he was viewed as a physician through this D3 program. Can you talk a little bit about how this internship was different than your own clinical background and how this has shaped what you plan to do in the future?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think when you're a fellow and you're a clinical fellow, you're constantly running around, you're constantly dealing with pages, you're constantly thinking about, okay, is this patient sick? Is this patient gonna like decompensate, anything like that, right? And working this internship, it's a different pace of life. But what you do is you bring all those lessons that you learned in your clinical experience to the table. And that is something that, at least at Revelation at the time, they didn't have a physician working full time. They had physician advisors on their board, but they would come to me and say, hey, this is how we're going to do our clinical trial. One, does this make sense? What other tests should we think about? What are the other things that we're missing in terms of how this drug could cause certain effects in the patient, and what are the things that we need to look for? And that's what I was able to bring to the table. And it's kind of cool, right? Because, at least as a first year fellow, you feel like you're at the bottom of the totem pole again. And it's nice to be viewed as as an equal, or even just like as an expert at something. And people will take that experience very as valuable. And I think, for me, how this will affect my future, it's like, so my research is in engineering, bioengineering. And so it's going to be a drug delivery of some form. And what this internship has done is made me kind of step back and say, is the project I'm doing actually something that's going to be translatable? And what are the metrics that I need to think about as I go through this in terms of into getting it into patient care? Because ultimately, like, we do all this research, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but it doesn't really matter if it doesn't help anybody. And so you got to think about that next step. And I think that's what those 4 weeks allowed me to gain. Like, what is the next step, and how do I think about that?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Jen, same question. How did your experience as a clinician inform your internship, and how that shaped your path going forward?
Yeah, so echoing Ram, I had a similar experience. The members at Dexcom were really interested to hear my clinical experience, especially around like DKA, how can we use technology better? What do we bring to the table, really? And then interestingly, there were some MDs also in the group, so I had an opportunity to talk to them and understand their career trajectory. Being, at Stanford and all along our medical training, we've been mostly exposed to academic medicine, and we haven't seen very much of the industry side. So this is basically an eye opener where I can see, I have these MD skills, I could do research, I could be a clinician, but this industry pathway is also something that's open.
That's really wonderful. I'm so glad to hear about both of your experiences. And thank you for answering all of my questions. Now I'll pass it over to Grant to talk about our D3 program this year and the sites that we have. And where's my notes?
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. This is wonderful to just be together and talk about the experience, talk about the program. And Jessica, wonderful job. We want to peel back the layer a little bit and just say, hey, who are we working with? Well, I think we've got really interesting experiences across the spectrum of, large scale surgical equipment, really interesting technology for medical device and monitoring, cutting edge therapeutics, diagnostics, well-established pharma. And then like on the flip side, each one of these sites has just amazing mentors that are there. And so, we've really built this up into a place where not only are you getting just exposure to wonderful groups, you're getting just great mentorship while you're there and exposure across the company. And so our approach really is we try and tailor as best we can. I will tell you that after some of these conversations, we get to, I think, a place where we can focus the interest for each applicant and understand the needs and the expectations a little bit more. And those change sometimes during our discussions. And, I think within industries, specializing in a particular domain really provides a lot of value. And so, I think, overall, these are great companies with really wonderful opportunities, each within them. I think from an application perspective, really try to have an open mind. Coming to us and saying, hey, I want, this at this company really isn't going to work, because that's not the mechanism that D3 tries to foster. And I think that limits your experience as well based on our experience. So next slide. We're happy to give a little bit more detail. I mean, Bayer is just wonderful. You get exposure really to international pharma development. I'll say initial projects probably revolve around endocrinology and adolescent health, but I was just on a call with them this morning and they're expanding their portfolio, and there's some other things that we can't necessarily disclose, but they're bringing more to the table than this. And next slide. For Bridge, this is such a wonderful opportunity because they do pharma a little bit differently. They have a different approach, and their portfolio is wide ranging all across the board in terms of what they're looking at and how they're evaluating that. And then they're also kind of a mergers and acquisitions arm where they acquire companies or form startups to tackle big problems. And then Dexcom is just a wonderful company. I mean, in the pediatric space, the continuous glucose monitor is the device. I think from my perspective, there's two major devices that exist within pediatrics. It's really the ventricular assist devices for, heart pumps and those types of things, and then the continuous glucose monitor. And partnering with Dexcom, you're getting exposure to a well-established device and how you're engaging with that within the community, as well as something that's just so prevalent now and increasingly so within the diabetes community. Genentech, they're our neighbors. I think that makes a big deal, to be honest. And I will say this is with Genentech, not Roche. And why that makes a big difference is it's part of the Bay Area culture. Genentech is, we are training our fellows. We're consulting and participating on research studies. There's a lot of, kind of a nice connection with them, but they have so many opportunities within the organization. GI being one. We're blessed that, one of our pediatricians went and became their, senior training medical director and is also the senior director there for GI. So, we've got these just awesome champions that, in their lens that they come from is, oh, I wish I would have had this experience when when I was a fellow or as I was starting in my career. Next slide. GSK is kind of the same thing, like just awesome opportunities that exist for people. And this one, genomic science as it relates to pediatrics is just so cutting edge. There's so much unknown because it hasn't been studied, and really learning about how that's done. This is public information, so I can share it, but GSK has this awesome partnership with 23andMe where they're looking at a lot of interesting data in a collaboration, and the person that applies for this or gets placed there, they get to be at the epicenter of it. And that's super cool. Like just getting exposure to how they're thinking about the data that's being processed by both organizations, not just one. And then Horizon, if you're familiar at all with what they're doing, talk about a meteoric rise within the therapeutic community. I mean, they are just crushing it. And they're coming at it from a place they want to do good. I mean, this is another thing. Their CEO has a rare disease, and they approach pharma very differently. And it's embedded within the culture of the organization. And they've got people that are in the right, kind of roles where they look at, how can I be a better mentor for you? And, I think we've got some really interesting cases that are present, within lupus, gout, and Behçet's, like 3 areas that just aren't super, looked out for, to be honest. Intuitive surgical, like this is another one. It's within the fabric of the Bay Area, broad scale surgical operating equipment, having exposure to how that plays an integral role in the modalities within our clinics. And so, and then they have a mentor who's just fabulous. And he's their, one of their chief medical officers, and just a wonderful, wonderful person. Ionis, if you're familiar at all with ASOs and what those could potentially bring to, sorry for the acronym, antisense therapies, what those can bring to patients who are super sick and have super rare diseases, the ability to configure a therapeutic to one individual presents such a wonderful opportunity. And if you're familiar with John Day, who's one of our pediatric neurologists, John is a specialist with spinal muscular atrophy, which is a just awful disease. And they have a therapeutic called Speranza, like the first ASO that, I've seen videos of patients that have just been transformed based on the modality. And so getting exposure to how they approach these problems just, I think, is eye-opening for how we look at medicine or how we look at innovation today. Pfizer, I mean, they're depending on how you look at it, they're the #1 pharma. They're, they do everything. We're blessed that we've got really wonderful people in that place that as they look at collaborating and engaging, you can just get an exposure to all these different things. And then Revelation, as Ram was mentioning, that is a company that was just forming 2 years ago, and where they are, today versus where they were before, is just so neat to see the progression, but really brilliant team of people who have done it before and they're doing it again. And so, how do you look at the problems that they're evaluating? So I think, a lot of really cutting edge opportunity that's present. Is there one more slide, Jessica?
Nope, that's all of it. I'll
Okay.
go over the application.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grant, for talking through all of those sites. Again, we're very excited to have this many partners this year to provide so much value across these different fields for all of our fellows. Just to touch on a question that was put in the Q&A, the projected start date on RFA is listed as November. There is no set deadline by which the 4 weeks need to be completed by. It really depends on your schedule as well as the schedule and availability of the team at the industry site. So upon acceptance into the D3 program, we would work with you and schedule meetings with the industry sponsor to determine what the best time frame for you to start your internship is. Now we have logistics. The application consists of a one-page personal statement that really talks about your interest specifically in the D3 program, given that it is a unique training opportunity, and how you feel that this unique internship would provide value to your career path and your own interests. In addition to your NIH Biosketch or CV detailing your own background, as well as lastly, a letter of nomination from your department chair, the division chief, or your training program director, with as a nomination, as well as a indication of salary support for the duration of the internship. The D3 program is offered as is approved as a elective through the GME, so it does provide credit for your overall training program, for your training path. The application is due Sunday, October 2nd, so in about a week and a half, with all of these components included. Did you have anything you wanted to add here?
No, I think it's great.
Yeah.
We're looking to, for anyone who really wants to apply, from our residents to our, our early career faculty. I think the approach is to come really eyes wide open. How we make this work is, conflict of interest is a big thing to the university. So we have to be very careful about how we're communicating our own ideas and our innovations versus what we're learning and experiencing at the site. And so there are some nuances to that, which as we go through and meet with you, we'll explain. But I think if you're coming into this and you're thinking, this is what I want to do, I already have this idea, and I'm bent on, making an impact in this space, I'm not exactly sure this program is for you. And the rationale for that is because your experience is going to change. Your lens that you're looking at is either broadened or narrowed based on your experience within industry. And then from that, you can springboard to other opportunities that are here within Stanford that have inherent costs, or, if you know that, pursuing a dedicated research career for yourself and living and dying by grant applications is not what you want to do, then it's awesome. We know that ahead of time. Or if you say, this is the life that I want to go live within industry because, they're tackling it from a different lens, and that adapts to how I approach, my work, that those opportunities exist as well. So I think really focus in on that personal statement. We'll even dive deeper and ask you other questions that you're like, why are you asking this question? Well, it's because we want to get to know you and make sure you have the best experience possible. And then what I also say is, because this is embedded within MCHRI, we are extremely connected within the community here at Stanford. And so if there are problems you're experiencing within or pain points that you have, we can, pursue some things to alleviate those all the way around. And, that why that makes a difference is because mentorship is really hard to find, and having significant people who are invested which our faculty mentors are, as well as the folks that are at these sites. That all plays a role. So yeah, I think overall, really a great opportunity. As far as I know, from a competitive landscape, Stanford's the only one that offers this in the mechanism that we do. Among our peers, our peer institutions. And yeah, I think overall, really wonderful opportunity for those that, commit to it. And, would love questions if, I think we've got a few minutes left. If folks have either questions for our panelists or questions for us or questions about the program, or, we want to get into specifics.
And while y'all think of those, if you have any questions afterwards about the application process, things that you weren't able to ask during this webinar, feel free to reach out to myself through email. I'm happy to answer them and continue the conversation there. But just to honor everyone's time, I'd just like to thank Ram and Jen again so much for your time and your effort in attending this webinar, really sharing about your experience and your insights during your own D3 internship. And we're so excited to see how you carry forward that experience.
Okay.
I'm going to stop the